Hey, everybody. Thanks so much, first of all, for watching this podcast in the show. We really appreciate it. Today, we have on Professor Wolff. He is an American treasure, one of my favorite guests that I've ever had on here. He is an American economist, the host of Economic Update, and also the founder at Democracy at Work. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Well, Bob, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So what do you see for wages? We know a lot of places are raising their minimum wage to $15 an hour. There's some states that have done amendments on it. There's some businesses that are raising their minimum wage to $15 an hour to start off. Mostly this is service industry stuff, of course. I've heard that a lot of the wages are going down in this country. What are you seeing as far as wages right now in 2021, 2022?
Well, in economics, again, I put on my hat as an economist. When we talk about wages, we like to talk about what we call real wages. And all that means is we adjust what you get paid in your pay envelope at the end of the week. We adjust it for the prices you have to pay. And that's for a simple reason. If you get a 10% wage increase, if your weekly wage goes from $400 to $440 every week, that's a 10% increase. That's not going to be much help to you if all the prices you have to pay at the grocery store also go up 10%. So the real wage measures how much more goods and services your wage can enable you to afford. And so it takes into account prices. I think if you look at the American economy today, the prospect for wage increases is very poor if you're looking at real wages. And let me tell you why. Very little attention has been paid to the fact that over the last 2 to 3 months, there have been significant increases in prices at the supermarket, at the hardware store. Major corporations, from the Nike company to Procter and Gamble to Starbucks to you pick, they're raising their prices because they haven't for a while. They know there's tons of money being pumped into the economy, and they want to compensate for the fact they didn't have a good year last year, and they're trying to jack up the prices. So unless you're getting 4 to 9%, that's the range. Unless you're getting 4 to 9% more money today than you got last year, you're not even keeping level. You can't afford as much this year as you could last year because your wages haven't gone up 4 to 9%. Yes, some of those at the bottom are getting finally the 15%. But let's be honest. The minimum wage in this country is still $7.25. It's been that since 2009. Every year in the United States since 2009, prices went up. Maybe only 1 or 2%. But you add that up, all the years since 2009, every time they went up, the poor people who got $7.25 could afford less because the prices were going up. You're barely catching up if you raise it now to 15 to what these people have already suffered. Yeah, they'll be able to buy some more. But remember, the exodus of jobs in this country continues as corporations go abroad for 2 reasons. The wages are lower there, and that's where markets are growing. When I tell you that General Motors sells more cars in China than it does in the United States, think a minute with me what that means. China is a growing market. Over the last 25 years, average wages in China, whose population is 4 times that of the United States, average wages has gone up 400% when American wages have been pretty flat. I mean, there's no that's, to use language of economics, China is a growing market. And every businessman and woman with an MBA in their background knows that where you want to be if you're a corporation is where the market is growing fastest. Hello, that's over there, not here. So the companies are going. And finally, when the companies have to pay higher wages, one of the things they love to do is to go and buy machinery that replaces people.
Right.
Machinery they didn't buy before when they could pay that poor fellow $7.25. But now that they have to pay him 15, which is only decent, well, then they're going to automate, which, by the way, both Trump and Biden leave them completely free to do. And then the worker who didn't like $7.50 or $7.25 is going to have no job at all. These problems are not solved. And because the government doesn't talk about them, doesn't mean they've gone away.
So how do you fix that problem that you just said? Because we're hearing a lot of these arguments, especially on TV, Professor Wolff, that they say, oh, well, if we raise it to $15, your hamburger, your quesadilla, your whatever it may be, is going to go up 20, 30 cents. So they scare a lot of these people, and they talk about automation too, but they scare a lot of these people to say, if we raise these wages, not only will I be poor, but I won't have a job. So how would a person that's a progressive rebut those arguments that, are consistently going through mainstream media every day?
Well, there's two ways that you ought to respond to those arguments, and these are really easy arguments to make.
Mm-hmm.
First, you have to remind people that the price of something, a hamburger, a quesadilla, you name it, any kind of fast food or anything, has in it the various costs that the business puts in there and pays for. In other words, it charges for the hamburger enough money to pay the wages of the hamburger flipper, to pay for the meat that goes into the hamburger and the roll that you put the hamburger in and the package. All of that has to be covered. But there are other elements. One of them is profits. They want a profit. They raise the price to be able to take that money and give it as fat dividends to very rich shareholders and fat CEO pay packages to people at the top of a McDonald's or Burger King or any of the others. If you want to give workers who get paid too little to have a decent life, a decent wage, like $15, you could at the same time say, the rich have gotten rich off of this long enough. The dividends have to be cut and the pay packages have to be moderated. Then you'll be bringing down some of the components of the hamburger price to compensate for raising others, which is a morally and legally perfectly okay thing to do. And that way, we could do something for the mass of underpaid workers, and we wouldn't need to raise the price of what they help, because we've compensated for the rising cost of labor by reducing the rising cost of pay packages that are off the wall. Let's remember, 40 years ago, the difference between what a CEO got on average and what the average worker got was about 40 to 1. Today, it's about 300 to 1. That's how well they've done. They could take a step down. They could go back to, I don't know, maybe just 100 to 1 or 150 to 1. If you did that, you could raise the minimum wage and it wouldn't change the price of your hamburger or your quesadilla at all. And the second way to argue is, look, an economic system is measured, is evaluated, is judged by how well it provides for the mass of its people: food, clothing, shelter, and education, medical care, and the basics of a decent life. If you're telling me that the American system can't pay millions of people more than $7, $8, $9, $10 an hour, you're telling me that this system is a failure. That's not an acceptable economic system. That there are homeless by the millions, that there are underpaid by the millions, that there are people without any medical insurance by the millions. This is a system that isn't working. And if the answer is we can't afford it, And yet at the same time, we are telling the world we're one of the richest countries in the world. Then there's a disconnect here, and that ought to be admitted before we begin to accept the idea that the only way to help those at the bottom is to hurt those in the middle. That was never true. One of the ways you help those at the bottom to get into the middle is to stop allowing the very small number at the top to live like there's no tomorrow, because they're doing that at the expense of the rest of us.
Well, the minimum wage should really be about 22 bucks an hour around there.
Easy.
So yeah, easy. It's really
Now,
sad.
in many, United States is really an outlier. $7.25 is among the lowest minimum wages in the industrialized world. Every European country I know of has a higher minimum wage, either legally or by custom, than we do. And they're able to function really very nicely, thank you. You know, a society does not have to do quote unquote profit as the bottom line. Profit is not the only thing that matters in a business. The lives of the majority of people, what kind of income they get, what kind of work they do, what kind of balance between their home life and family life on the one hand and their work life, those are just as important for the mass of people as profits are for a minority of the people who get them. Yet we say in economics that the job of the enterprise must be to maximize profit. No, it doesn't. That's good for the people who get the profit. But most people in an enterprise, the employees, don't see the profit. So it is crazy to tell them you should be doing something that's good for those people, because they're not worrying whether your wage is good enough for your life. You're just worrying about whether the profit is good enough for them. And that's a system that's working well for them, but not for you and me.
I want to end the interview with a couple of questions on housing. I think this is a huge topic
Yes.
going on right now. My friend who lives in Massachusetts, where I believe you are right now, he's in Mansfield. He bought a house up there for, it was a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom. It was $670,000, out of this world. Now he makes good money and he could afford it, but it still was an extreme amount of money. We know this is a seller's market right now. What is your, what I guess I should say rather, what is your opinion on the housing market that you're looking at 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom houses selling for $680, even down in Florida, the same thing, 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, it's like 300 some odd thousand. I don't know how people are buying these houses. I have a feeling that a lot of these private equity firms are buying these houses, and we're seeing a lot of the stuff that happened in 2008 where people are renting from these private equity firms and they kind of keep raising the rent and then they're going to end up homeless. Well, what is your take on this housing market that's insane, in plain English?
Well, I think, again, let me start with what I said before and extend it. One of the things an economic system is supposed to do is to provide everyone with public health, with a decent education, with enough food to feed themselves and be healthy. And another one is housing. I mean, it's one of the most basic things. Either you make the house affordable at the level of wages people have, or if you don't want to control the price of the housing, then make the wages high enough to afford decent housing. We've been studying this in economics for many, many decades. And we understand that in order to have a decent life in this country, you need to spend no more than roughly 25% of your disposable income on your housing. And because if you spend more than that, it's going to take away what you have left to take care of your food and your clothing and your transportation and your education, your medical care and everything else. That's elementary. Okay, by that standard, the American capitalist system isn't solving the problem. We have an enormous number of people who have no home. The people living on the street, the people sleeping in the back seat of their car, the people fill in the blank. You know all about that.
Yeah.
That's obviously a failure of housing. I might mention that last week, finally, a sitting judge in Los Angeles, ordered the county of Los Angeles to take everyone on Skid Row. Los Angeles has a very big Skid Row, and give them a proper apartment, because it is a violation of the basic rights of the people in his jurisdiction there in Los Angeles to be out on the street and have no home. The community, at a time of COVID, it's almost a conviction that you're risking dying from the disease. You know, we tell everybody, stay indoors and wash your hands. If you're homeless, Jack, you can't do that. And that's a torture of people. I mean, that's cruel and unusual punishment. So he ordered it. And I think that's a sign forward. So here's my proposal. Either you raise the wages so housing can be afforded. And by affordable, I mean you raise the wages enough so that the housing you get doesn't take more than roughly, give or take a little, 25% of your income. If you're spending more than that, sure, you can do that, but then your housing isn't affordable. Then your housing costs are eating into the rest of your life, requiring you, for example, to borrow up the wazoo, which is a very dangerous situation that we all know about. Or you bring down the price of the housing so people can afford it. And here comes a punchline. If you cannot make enough profit as a private capitalist to produce the housing and or to rent the housing, then the government should step in and do it for us. Most countries in the world, that's how they do it. The government builds and operates housing because the private sector can't. I recently visited the city of Vienna in Austria, a very old, beautiful city. And then I learned an arresting fact. 80% of the housing in that city, 80, is public housing. I visited people. The housing is beautiful, beautifully kept projects, if you want to call them that, but with trees and fountains and flowers, very well maintained. That's what the people of Vienna want, and they've solved their problem, making housing affordable by having the government step in. And let me tell you something. If the private sector in America had real competition from public housing that was good quality, well-maintained, and at an affordable price, you would see the private sector step up. The same private capitalist who gives a speech about how he loves competition is terrified lest the government actually compete with him, and that's because he risks losing. Governments don't have to make profits, and they have an enormous advantage over private enterprise because they don't. And we as the consumer, that's not our problem. That's their problem. We need affordable housing. We can give the private sector the first shot at it, but if they can't do it, and they don't, they're not able in this country, then we have another solution, and it's only shame on our politicians that they haven't acted on it. Part of my family is French. So I go to France. Ever since I've been a little kid, I speak French. So I can go there. I'm not like a tourist in the sense that I can speak the language. So one of the things I discovered about France years ago, many years ago, I could not believe when I first learned it. And I noticed to this day, when I tell Americans, which I'm about to do with you, what this is in France, Americans don't believe it, even though I can assure you this is the case. In France, when a young man or woman enters the labor force, you know, he or she graduates from high school or graduates from college or however much education they got, when they're finished and they go in and they get a regular job, the law in France requires their employer, whether it's a private employer or a public agency, whoever employs them, their job has to have, get ready now, 5 weeks of paid vacation every year. And if you ask French people, why do you do that? They look at you as if there's something wrong with you, because a decent life means I got to have time off to deal with my children, to work out the problems that normally arrive between a husband and a wife, to take care of the elderly parents that we're still supporting, to have a vacation, to have a little time off, to unwind, to retool, maybe take a course somewhere. I need these. These are part of the quality of life. I, as a French citizen, that's what they say, I deserve it, I want it, I need it, and that's the way it is. And I say this to America. Most Americans don't get 5 weeks of paid vacation ever in their work life. And if you do get it, it's at the end, you know, a few years before they give you that crappy watch and say goodbye, right? But this should not be something that French people or Germans, by the way, it exists in Germany and Italy and a lot of the countries of Europe. They can do it, we can do it. They have free education. Germany now says, if you want to go to school, not only will we cover the cost of elementary school and high school, but you want to go on to college, no fees, no tuition. I don't know how many Americans understand. That's now 7 European countries have instituted 100% free education. And by the way, in Germany, your audience may be interested. This is available not only to German citizens, but to anyone. There are currently 20,000, last time I looked, 20,000 Americans like you and me who have gone to Germany, because in Germany, no tuition, no fees, very good quality education, plus you can learn another language, which is good for you. All you have to pay is your own upkeep, your room, your board, your clothing, but you have no educational fees or tuitions to pay. The Germans do it. The Italians do. I mean, come on. This is something we can do. And I'm not even going to the fact that every one of those countries has a national health service that covers everybody from birth to death. Doesn't matter who your employer is. It doesn't matter whether you're employed or not. Your health care is covered. These are civilized societies' services to the mass of people. It is nothing short of shameful that the United States cannot do that. Don't call yourself the richest country in the world if what you really mean is that you've got the richest people in the world. You do, but you've also got a mass of people that do not enjoy what Europeans have come to take for granted for decades.
The commercial real estate crisis, it seems like history's repeating itself again. There's that domino effect where, you know, businesses are going to go down, people are going to lose jobs, and then obviously they're going to lose their houses, they're going to go homeless. Have you been hearing about this commercial real estate loan crisis?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And let me explain it to people. Commercial real estate, the way you're using it, has two kinds. One is if a commercial institution buys a lot of houses and converts them from privately homeowner occupied homes into rental properties. And that has happened ever since the crash of 2008 and 9. Big capitalist enterprises have been buying up houses that were sold at really low prices by desperate people needing to get out of the mortgages they couldn't afford because they had lost their job. So these companies bought up fire sales style these houses and are now making money by renting them out. That's one kind of commercial real estate. The other kind of commercial real estate, which is bigger, is when you rent property to a commercial institution. So think of it as people who own a mall, and in the mall there are lots of stores. Those stores are tenants of the commercial landlord who owns the mall, or a building in which a store exists that has to pay to the building owner a rental. Here's what happened to all of these folks. Because our economy collapsed first in 2008 and 9 with the so-called subprime mortgage crash, and now again over the last 15 months connected to the pandemic and to the fact that we were due for another downturn, to use the euphemism. Because of these reasons, the Federal Reserve, the government of the United States, decided to pump a ton of money into the economy and to lower interest rates further than we have ever seen in American history. All of you know that the interest rate, for example, on a savings account, if you have one, has hovered around 0.5%, 1%, lower than you've ever seen it before. Here's what this meant. Every commercial landlord, every capitalist of any kind who had any kind of problem over the last 10 years, they produced something that didn't sell. They chose a technology that didn't work out real well. They're having a fight with their employees. Whatever the problem a corporation had, the easiest, quickest, cheapest solution was to go to the Federal Reserve and borrow all this money at virtually no interest. This is a no-brainer. And so over the 10 years, guess what? The level of indebtedness of American capitalists, whether they were commercial landlords or anything else, went like crazy because they all took advantage of virtually costless loans. They're still doing that to this day. That's part of what fuels the stock market going up. All the players can borrow at nothing and go in there and play the market. And if they make some money, wonderful for them. Okay, last point. What we're seeing now is that as the economy gets pinched, more and more of the tenants, whether they are people who are in a house or an apartment or storekeepers in a mall, they can't do it. People are not spending the kind of money they did before. It's just like in 2008. Only the difference is their debts are much bigger. So the minute they suffer a reverse, they're finished. We have roughly 1/5 of all corporations in America are now, and this is my final point, zombie corporations. It's a new term. It means a company whose profits are less than the interest they owe on their debts. And so they're really technically bankrupt. And the way they keep going, you'll love this, is borrowing more so they can pay off their old debts. But you know, that's a strategy that will not end well. That's going to collapse. It's no longer a question of whether, it's just a question of when. And that's a sign of a system in very deep doo-doo.
So before we end, and you just kind of explained it well about this crisis, because I think a lot of people are not talking about this on the news. They're worried about Biden passing the plans, which, you know, is important, of course. But this is a big crisis that not a lot of people are speaking about. With that said, are you saying that a lot of people are going to, obviously, these businesses are going to shut down? A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. People are going to be thrown out of their houses. It already has.
We are now closing malls in this country. Malls we're closing malls on a scale we've never seen before. That's been going on now for several years, and it's getting worse and worse. And even, first of all, malls are dead. Drive around America, you'll see malls that nobody's in the parking lot except the weeds coming up through the asphalt. That's all, number one. Number two, companies see an opportunity. Amazon is buying malls, gutting all the buildings to convert them into storage and transfer stations because Amazon needs them. But that's many fewer jobs, many fewer benefits to the community of having a big station automated with a dozen workers compared to 50 stores that were there before. And all of the secondary benefits of malls, places for teenagers to go, places for people to have a way to meet one, all of that's gone. And it's going to impact the quality of life because that crisis is already here. It's not a question of coming. It's already here. And anyone watching this program, just drive off into the countryside looking for malls and you'll see the crisis right in front of your face. And what we're doing now is the best way I can explain it, we
Okay.
now have a private sector of the United States in housing, but in many other fields, that's on government life support. That's what it means that you've raised your debts, taken advantage of low interest rate to borrow all this money. Much of the entities holding those debts of the corporations is the government. It's the Federal Reserve that is sitting there having lent that money out. So you have to understand the old debate between the private sector and the public, that's over. There really is no private sector hardly left. They're all dependent on the endless pumping of money, on the interest rates that are kept at a ridiculously low level. They're now dependent on it. The Federal Reserve has said it dares not raise the interest rate. That's a government on life support. And what most doctors will tell you about a patient on life support, that's not a good place to be, because sooner or later, that won't be enough. And then what?
So what's going to happen? Will the interest rates ever go high as we end the interview? Because,
Not unless many other things would have to change. Otherwise, the Federal Reserve dares not do that.
Professor Wolff, I really appreciate this. It means a lot that you come on this program all the time. For people that don't know Professor Wolff, definitely look him up at YouTube, and you can look them up at the Economic Update, also Democracy at Work. Professor Wolff, thanks so much for your time. I'm really worried about this housing issue, but
all right, so take care, Bob, and I'm glad
to
have the conversations with you as well.